Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon to wherever you are sitting. Welcome to today's live event on building resilient network organizations. I'm Helena, voice of the customer at LUMAN and podcast host of Where Boundaries Dissolve, where I met actually our lovely Philip, co-founder at LUMAN, who's joining us today. Philip is a truly inspiring person in my life. And so I'm very excited to have you here with us today, Philip. And for those who don't know, if you also want to be inspired on a regular basis, go over and follow Philip's blog on Medium. He posts amazing blogs out there, or follow him on LinkedIn. He also publishes them as LinkedIn articles. So he really puts out truly amazing work. And today, we are talking about resiliency in network organizations and what network organizations is actually about. I'll also be touching upon a few points and digging deeper into the recent blog post you put out there, Philip. So I want to start with this idea of why we're shifting into network organizations, right? Everyone seems to have understood that there is a need for change. We were raised in these very hierarchical organization, matrixed organization, where information was handed down to us, decisions were handed down to us, tasks were handed down to us. And now it's suddenly this idea of, oh yeah, we do need decentralized organizations to speed up decision making. So there's not just one person in the organization. So I empower you to come up with the answer to this very complex problem. And every leader, I feel like that, or a lot of the leaders that have sat in rooms where they're like, "Oh, I'm empowering you to do this," just hands that over, and there's little to no guidance to the teams. And so teams that have been raised in these different, cultural, have been raised in these different cultural setups. Where they're used to taking this kind of information, they sit there and they don't really know what to do, and so nothing really happens, which is even more frustrating, right? Because the reason why we need decentralized organizations is to adapt to market changes faster. And so there's this notion of, oh, my team is not doing anything, and oh, my leader is not really guiding me through this process in the right way or in the way that I need it. And so there's this underperformance that is happening and this lack of guidance. From what you've experienced guiding organizations through this shift and enabling and establishing team cultures to be able to prepare to step into the future, what can leaders do, Philip, to enable this shift and accelerate innovation without overwhelming their people and reduce the stress that this is causing on teams?
Very loaded question. I think the first part is to really accept that we are in the middle of this transformation, right? To really understand that this is not just some management fad of like the latest, coolest thing that we should be doing. Last week it was agile, now it's network. You know what I mean? But it's like all of those things actually feed into an understanding that we need to organize ourselves in a new way. Because A, we have the capacity to do so, thanks to the advances in technology, but B, also the necessity. And it's because we're moving out of a time of relative stability when things were relatively certain and relatively coherent, in which these large-scale hierarchical models worked, right? All the way from the Roman military all the way to today's day and age, right? There was a leader who knew where to go, and they decided to give the goals to their team, and then they broke them down into smaller and smaller and smaller goals, trickling all the way down to the organizational bottom, right, in quotation marks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happened is that worked when there was, as I said, very little change happening. But if you're in the middle of transformation where every day there's a new thing happening, right? Every day there's a new weather report of, some new catastrophe somewhere. Every day there's a, new way of, competitor doing something new. Every day there's, supply chain changes because of even, armed conflicts in today's day and age, but hard to believe. But even that, right? Supply chain changes, international relationships are changing. Organizations are changing in terms of the customers' needs are changing, right? They have more, volatile needs too, because one day they need this, the next day they need this other thing suddenly, right? Like, how do you respond to that so quickly? And that doesn't work, for this one guy to know what's up and then tell everybody else what to do. That doesn't work, right? I mean, we can actually question if it ever worked, but it got us here, right? So
Yeah.
it worked to some reasonable amount, and I think there's some appreciation that's important as well for how it got us here, right? And because if we want to build the future, we have to become present. We have to acknowledge the past and say, hey, this got us here. Great. Doesn't mean it's bad or wrong. It just means that what's required now is different.
Mm-hmm.
We have these rapid market changes. We have these changing customer and employee demands on an organization, on leadership. And so this is where these network structures have been evolving.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And things like Agile have been feeding into that, right? Even design thinking and the customer orientation have been feeding into that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? One of the things they learn in design thinking, where a lot of organizations have actually gotten kind of good at by now, right, is that the focus on the customer requires multiple perspectives, right? You can't just have an innovation team over here that comes up with something new, because then that doesn't reintegrate back into the organization. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You need these multifunctional teams across silos to really look, how can we serve customer value together? Right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where networked organizations make sense now, or at least the beginning of it, right? Because you can't change this big tanker into a drone swarm overnight. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And begin to build yourself some little drone caters, right? So you have the first beginnings of little swarms that are exploring what is now changing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially when things are changing a lot, you want a lot of exploration. You want innovation all across the organization, ideally, right? Where people who are connecting with your customer are constantly scanning for potential opportunities to create value.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then form together with other people in the organization to make that happen. Right? So it's a good, practice for a time, that allows us to become more resilient, right? Because static things, right? If you think about like a really big, old, heavy tree, that one will break in the heavy wind, right? And
Yeah.
the flexible tree, right, that will keep moving, right? And it's a little bit like that when I have a big tanker. If it hits an ice, block, it's going to go under, right? Versus if I have a drone swarm, it can move around it and be way more, resilient and way more responsive to market changes.
Mm-hmm. 100%. I really love what you said with the fact of appreciation, because that really does build the bridge and acknowledges, that things have been done right in the past. Like, we are where we are today because of that, because the way things were done. And if you acknowledge that, you can also people feel appreciated, they feel seen, because otherwise if you move in, you're like, okay, I empower you and now you do this. It was like, wait a minute, this is how we were doing things. Was that wrong? And by the way, it's not wrong, because we're where we are today because of it. And so I think that's a very important thing for leaders to be able to acknowledge and to appreciate their teams and what has been done right so far, and then lay the foundation to like, okay, guys, how are we stepping into the future now? And this is required, that we need to be more nimble. We need to be able to learn and experiment and adapt to these market changes. And for this, I need all hands on deck, because you're smart people. But I've experienced this is extremely challenging, right? You mentioned cross-functional collaboration. You mentioned that we need different people from within the organization, these a multitude of different experts coming together to solve very complex problems, to be able to break that down, to be able to look at it from different angles. But that can be very challenging if you have people that are still, I don't want to say stuck, but just understand this old way of doing things better. And so what does it take on a personal level? And you speak about in your blog post, and what I'm trying to get to is this concept of self-authorization. And this is something that was very new to me when I first met you. You were talking about being self-authored. And I didn't really understand what that meant, and how that related to shifting into these network organizations, shifting into this ability to become a better learner and absorber, and also ultimately more resourceful in how I did my job, and not reliant on someone giving me orders, right? But being able to, depending on the problem that I faced, being able to tackle that without having to run to my manager. So can you help us understand what that actually means, self-authored, and why that is such a huge and fundamental shift in the change that we're experiencing right now?
Absolutely. I took the word from Robert Keegan's research. He's an American psychologist who wrote a book on immunity to change, where he was looking at how do we actually and why do we not, move into the future, even though we all know that we kind of should. Right. And so he was looking at that book. He was looking at, a lot of, large organizations and comparing people on their adult development level. Right. And if you think about an adult, right, everyone starts from scratch, right? We've all 1 cell, 2 cells, 4 cells at some point. We're all planned like in our mom's belly. We crawl out and learn how to be a human being in school and from our parents and from peers and later from the organizational context that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And most of that context has prepared us to be really good socialized individuals. And what that means is, if you think about those different stages, the lowest stages of the imperial self, that's kind of small early childhood, or people who have, abilities in terms of addictions, for example, who are just focused on that very myopic little thing, and that's the only thing that they need to get right now. Well, that's the sort of impulsive self. Right? The next stage is that imperial self. We find that in sort of toxic narcissists, for example, that have become more and more visible in organizations. But then we have this 35% of kind of the majority bulk of adults. So 65% total of these people who are in the socialized stage or below. Right? And the socialized stage is essentially what we learned in school. Right? First, mother and father, then the teacher, then the preacher, maybe sometimes even, or whatever version of that. Right? And then the boss, the professor in the university, they know what's right. And there's this idea that there is a right way, and that we have to find out the right way. And once we do it right, then we can just repeat doing that.
Right.
So this was the idea that we were taught in school and in university, and also in job descriptions. Right? There's essentially a process to be executed, right? And ideally, you have that process well defined, and it's based on rational decision making. Now, the problem is at this point, AI makes much more rational decisions than we do. And in a way, like a little pocket calculator is better at executing algorithms than most humans are. Right? And so technology has caught up with us. Right? Yuval Harari talked about how now with large language models, we've hacked our own human operating system, right? Because language, everything is driven on language, right? It's a programming language of culture, right? That's what the language we speak and hear and read. Now AI can do that. Now in a way that can be a much better, good little employee than any human, right? Because they're more predictable in some ways, or it doesn't even have to be AI, right? Most processes and organizations, and I would venture to say about 50% of them right now, and with AI probably about 80%, can be replaced and automated. Now, what does that do to our work world? Right now, I don't need people who are very good at executing things. I need people who actually act from their own intrinsic motivation and from their own intrinsic values. And this is where we come to the self-offering stage, and it's only about 35% of adults, right, who are capable of doing that, who are not just responding to external stimuli and looking for external validation continuously, but who are doing things because they seem right to them, they're meaningful to them, they're acting on their own values and consciously making decisions and agreements with others. Right? Now that we have AI kind of having caught up with us on that socialized level, we need adults who actually can have meaning in their text, right? AI can tell completely wrong things, right? Sometimes it's hallucinating even, right? And it can tell you that Prince Charles invented the toilet, right? Which he apparently likes toilets a lot, so AI might conclude that he invented it, right? It might actually give you a sentence that says he did that, right? And if you don't have meaning making, if you don't have sense making that comes from an internal place, you're going to be a victim and prey to all the things that are happening now. Right? You're going to read blog posts, and you're going to be an insane amount of fake media suddenly, right? With deep fake pictures and videos of people and all kinds of things that AI can produce now. That if you don't have that intrinsic place that you're operating from, you're constantly going to be reacting to being stimulated. Right? We've already lost. Tristan Harris talks about that. We already lost the first encounter with AI, which was essentially social media algorithms. Right? What has happened since we have put AI into social media algorithms? We've had clans and cults forming and separation and a split in society and increased anxiety and social mental disorders. All kinds of things have happened with this first encounter with AI. Think about what's happening now.
Completely oblivious to it.
And this is the other side of it, where beyond a network organization, you simply need humans who are actually telling the AI what to do rather than the other way. With respect to this network organization, I need that same low-code internal locus of control in my individual drones. Right? If a drone sits there and says, "Daddy, tell me what to do," boss, tell me what to do, that's not going to work. Right? And if the boss just says, "Well, go make that project happen," also not going to work. Like to your point at the beginning of this story, right? I can't just say, "Hey, we're a flat hierarchy now, or we're a networked organization now, and you go execute on this," right? Because people are not used to this. Right? This has not been how we've learned to learn. This is not even the idea that, if you think about when I was a little younger, the idea of continuous learning or lifelong learning was a special thing.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, really? It should be a special thing. You're not done when you're done with school. Always learning, right? And I think we had that stability that allowed us to say, by the time you're 30, 35, you've figured out your job and you're going to just do it for the next 30 years until you don't much. Nothing much changed. It's not happening anymore now. Right? We need to actually ultimately shift the curve into more self-offering individuals. And especially for leaders, we need to go one step further and go into self-transformation. Right? Because as a leader, you actually get to hold the space for your team to develop into self-actualizing and self-offering individuals, right? You get to hold the space and create the environment for them to show up authentically. Right? That's where people confuse management with leadership, right? Because management is about the structural side of how do I now give tasks to people. Leadership is enabling people to actually execute on these tasks. And this comes back to what you started with.
I mean, I think that's really fundamental what you just addressed, because there are three aspects that are changing right now, right? There's this for leaders. They have to understand, okay, I need to shift from a matrixed organization. I need to shift into this network organization. So that's number one, like, okay, what does that actually mean? How do I educate people? But then also understanding that within this, you have to understand that there has been this shift from, this socialization shift to being more self-authored. And then you have to understand that network organization, that you have to really develop people within that, as you say in the blog post, like your network organization is only as strong as your weakest node. And so there's all of these shifts, like, okay, how do I shift the organization? How do I shift myself as a leader, where I'm enabling people to show up as their full selves and understand their full selves and understand what they actually need during that transition? And then how do I create the space for people to discover that, to understand that, to step into their power, and then to evolve into the superhuman that they, the best version of themselves that they can be. And what does that environment look like? And so how are we doing that without overwhelming people? And so that, I think, leads me to my next question. How are we creating these environments where that can happen? Because there is a lot happening at the same time, right? There is change happens at multiple levels within the organization, at an individual level, team level, organizational level. What can leaders do to lay that foundation for their teams and themselves? How can they be more, how should I say, more resilient also throughout that process? Because what I'm hearing from you as well is that this change is ongoing. This isn't an evolution.
This is going to keep going. Yeah. And I think the key is starting with yourself, right? And really understanding that, I like Huxley's quote, where there's only one corner in the universe we can be certain of improving, and that's your own self. Right? So as a leader, start with you. And even if you think about the word leader, for us in Lumen, we think everybody can be a leader. It's not depending on your position or hierarchy in the hierarchy somewhere, but it's about actually, and that's what the original word means, taking the first step. Right? To take a step into the future so that other people see that it's even possible. Right? So that is the starting point as a leader, is to make that commitment to yourself and to your own future and to the future of your children, to say, I'm going to commit to doing something about it. And then it's really important to be kind, right? Be kind to yourself in the process, right? It's like, this is a huge task, and we are all confused right now, right? And humanity, when they work with a lot of futurists, and they have different scenarios and different tools and great, research tools that they've developed over the decades, of futurism, but they still don't know what's going on, right? Or what's going to happen. Right? We can anticipate certain changes, and there are some likelihoods of things to happen, but we don't know. Right? So everybody's figuring this out. Be kind to yourself. Right? Nobody knows how to run a network organization, really. Right? It's an academic concept that we're just beginning to implement now. And so anybody who is choosing leadership, know that you're doing something very special to begin with. So be kind to yourself, but take time to connect to yourself, but take time for some morning ritual, or the time that we don't usually make between job duties and home duties and all that stuff. That time that most important, in a way, person gets lost, and that's yourself. Right? So make time for yourself, for your own growth process, and acknowledge that you are in a growth process to begin with, and that's okay. It's not about being perfect or knowing how to do it right now. It's about continuously learning, about continuously expanding your awareness, continuously stepping up in your responsibility and in your ownership of your own life. Right? So you can consciously choose your identity that you're showing up as. And make that process visible. But I think it's important for team members to also know that you're going through a process, and not the, hey guys, I don't know what to do. Right? And that's not going to create much confidence from your team and you. But to say, you know what, I had this issue yesterday. I'm freaking out about this. Here are 3 things I'm doing right now to address it for myself. And share your process that way. Right? Because then people see, wow, they're also freaking out. It's okay to freak out. And they're giving me some practical advice of what's working for them. Right? And there's shared vulnerability that creates an atmosphere of trust. Right? And it creates this, when your boss can be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm in the process of this, then it's more likely for you to be okay as a team member to do the same. Right? And so I think that's the other part there. And then to really be in conversation with people and see, what do you need? Right? What's in the way? Right? And starting with having a bit of a purpose and direction for your team, so you know, hey, this is where we're going. Right? There's a clear outcome for people that even though they don't know how I might get there, they don't know exactly what it's going to look like yet, they know they're going to fulfill a purpose. Well, this is all falling off of the problem, not the solution. But we say, hey, this is what we're doing as a team, so that everybody has that understanding. Right? And then give them, provide guidance along the way, and to really have regular communication, have regular check-ins with people, making sure that they know where they're at and that whatever they might need in any given moment. Right? And also to encourage peer support, right? So that's not just coming to you, but they're supporting each other. They're also reaching out inside the organization. Right? One of the things that large organizations forget is that they have a really huge brain trust in the organization. Sometimes it's a little hard to find them in the corporate directory, but there's more and more good sites. Some of our clients have sites where you can look up experts in the organization, and we can find the others. Right? And so that's the next step, is find some of the others, right? So that you remember that you're not alone. Of course, you're always alone. You're never alone. Right? Leader. There are other crazies in the organization who are already willing to step into the future, who are willing to say, hey, let's become, in a way, the fabric softener for what I call big tanker over here.
Yeah.
Right? Individual little pockets. Yeah. Start doing things differently. A certain groundswell of doing things differently. And so that's how you do things around here.
Yeah.
Culture is typically created by those innovators and early adopters. And once you come past that abyss, past that chasm to the early majority, that becomes a thing of its own. Right? They'll take it all the way to the laggards. Oh, the laggards are going to leave. Right? But they're going to take it from there. Right? So also focus on the coalition of the willing, like I say. Right? With our clients, we found that what's really successful is self-enrollment. Right? Programs that we offer, for example, the boot camps for entrepreneurship or the different cultural programs, we suggest to do self-enrollment, because then you find the people who already want to do a little bit more, right? Who are willing to, no matter where they are in the organization.
But then truly what I hear you saying is truly, so self-enrollment is a big one, but then also just realizing, from what you're saying, realizing that this is something that has to be designed. Culture doesn't just happen. Shift doesn't just happen. You can talk about decentralization. You can talk about getting into a network organization, but it's actually sitting down and being like, no, the way we do things has to change around here. The way I lead has to change. You mentioned one crucial aspect, practices and rituals. I found that, for example, having these retrospectives was a great way to start changing the dynamics in the team culture. And how vulnerable and open we are with each other, and talking about, things that didn't go very well.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, the retro is the team version of your own individual reflection as a leader.
Right.
Making time for your own progress and your own learning and your own self-reflection is super important.
Yeah.
But then sharing it with your team, you're doing it together. Right. And as I said, then you can speak about things that are maybe not working so well.
Yeah.
And that's okay too. And then you form those completely new bonds with each other. And the other part is that you also have the opportunity to make sure that you have good agreements with each other, right?
Yeah.
That you live up to these agreements, right? This is that new structure of, instead of a prescribed culture that already exists, that we figure out what's right, and therefore we're all doing it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Now culture is distributed and continuously created. Right? And every team has its own culture.
Yeah.
Right? And one team might do things very differently from a different team.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's important to not just assume that there exists any sort of default culture, but that we are actively shaping and crafting culture in every interaction. Right?
Yeah.
How each of us shows up in the organization every day
Mm-hmm.
changes the organizational culture. And
Yeah.
I've been seeing it with clients again and again. When once a certain amount of people suddenly show up a certain way, it becomes a new culture. It becomes how we do things around here.
Yeah.
We're social animals, right? Monkey see, monkey do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so we follow other people's lead, right? And the people who are showing up, who are visible, who are willing to go there, if they show up with an inviting and creating an atmosphere around them that is inviting that kind of culture, it seems to be happening, right? I mean, I see it more and more where people do that. Like some of the people in our programs, for example, we did a research follow-up where they found that one person who participated in one of our bootcamp programs, influencing 10 people around them in their home department in terms of how they worked afterwards.
Yeah.
And so there's that scalable change that you can make. And again, it always starts right here with the team around you and with the people that you're enabling to be more.
I love that. I really love that, because I was just going to touch upon the scalability of this, which is key. You can't just leave it up to the goodwill of a few individuals. But yeah, I think network organization is really about that, is recognizing the shift that it takes, and that it's not just going to happen by talking about it on a PowerPoint slide or empowering people, but it's really this conscious shift of how am I leading myself? How am I leading others? How am I creating the space for people to evolve and to understand how they want to transition and learn how to adapt to this fundamental shift in how we collaborate with each other. That we need this space for self-care, self-reflection, team care, so that we can make this process of learning and adapting and evolving a more fruitful one, essentially, and a less frustrating one. So thank you so much for being with us today. I am extremely excited to continue the conversation on these topics about team culture, scaling team culture, and how we do that within network organizations. We're actually going to be hosting another live next week, probably with Tirza, on future-ready teams versus high-performing teams. So the Ferrari versus the Tesla example. But for now, thank you so much, Philip. Thank you so much to everyone else tuning in. And if you do have any questions on how to set yourself up for success in a network organization for continuous learning, market adaptation, and resilience, reach out to Philip, Tirza, or myself. We're happy to be sparring partners on how you can do that. With that, thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.